Hello and welcome to another BuildASoil YouTube FAQ video. Today we've got Season 5 FAQ 7. I've got them printed out right here. It's what it looks like. I'm just going to jump in. I've not read these yet. We're going to read them, rate in order, answer them. If you like getting your questions answered like this, all you have to do is comment on our YouTube series and ask questions. And when you do, if it's a question that a lot of people want answered, Dean will find it, he'll put it on here, and I'll record a video like this. All right, let's jump in. FAQ 7. Darren says, with the trichrome, I almost said trichrome. With the trichomes turning amber, at what point is too many? Is 70% amber, 30% milky too far? Yes, but let me discuss this because there's a few things that I had to learn when I started hearing about what trichomes were, how to finish, and of course, when you're new, you're like, oh, I heard you have to be at this percentage amber, and oh, you just went off the looks, you've got a scope. And so I got a scope, I got a loop, I tried different methods, and I gotta tell you, I found out lots of people made the same mistake that I did. They would go up to a plant, let's say this is the plant, and they would take their scope and they'd go to the plant, and they're kind of hovering over it, and they're trying to look. Very difficult to do. What's better is to snip with scissors a very small piece of the plant, set it on like a white piece of paper, and then you use your jeweler's loop or use your scope, digital microscope, whatever you've got, so that you can actually take a look at it. Now, once I figured that out, that made a big difference. But the next thing that I found is that because the bud is so important, many people, many new growers, they will take a little sugar leaf. And maybe they'll take one near the top, maybe they'll take one somewhere else, but they'll take a sugar leaf and they'll flip it off the scissors onto the piece of paper and they'll look. And if you look at a sugar leaf, let's say day 55, day 60, you're gonna see a high percentage of amber. And if you go as long as I go, you're gonna see a major percentage of amber. To me, that's irrelevant. What I like to look at is the actual flower cluster, the bud that we wanna smoke. And I will go into a little side nug near the top and I'll cut the tip off. Kind of sucks to do it, but whatever. I'm taking one little tiny piece of the flower and I'm cutting that. And then I'll set that down and then I'll take a look with my scope. And typically what I see, even at 91 days, you can see that fruit by the funk was maybe 10% amber, and that's right where I like it. So hopefully that answers your question. If you're looking at the same part of the flower as I am, most of the types of genetics that I like will get 10 to 20% by the time they're pretty deep into flower. I've seen some quicker flowering strains that will get a little bit faster turn on the amber, and so you might have a higher percentage, but I'll tell you a lot of this is preference. But what I do see is people looking at the wrong part of the plant, thinking that it's a higher percentage than it is, and typically 70% amber on the nug, that's just beyond to me. That means you waited too long, and I personally haven't seen that. So I just wanted to share that with you. Next question, John T. Let's get a sip here. Hi, Jeremy. Love the content. Has been really inspiring. Thanks, John. I appreciate that. It's inspiring to me that people actually listen to this and that I get to make a living doing what I love, so thank you. You talk about local sourcing. So as a company near me offers humus, I like hummus, humus compost, and another offers black gypsum. Can I use these to build a living soil? Thanks for the lessons. Yes, so the humus compost I would be a little leery of. Oftentimes people that are making what I call a humus compost, it usually is ground up bark or a high percentage of that. And I don't find that to be as good. It robs most of the nitrogen, is excessively high in potassium and sodium, and doesn't work very well for soil building. However, what I would recommend is if other people have used it, maybe they can give you some feedback. If not, ask them for a test. Otherwise, what I'd like to do is part of the BuildASoil Way, we have a free course. I'm going to do a lesson on soil testing and compost analysis, just the basics, so that people can analyze local materials to them to use them. And I promise to announce it when I release that. But when I test a compost, for instance, most of the compost here in Western Colorado was very woody. There's basically a lot of, like the landscaping around here would be leaves and tree branches. And then to that would be cow manure from all of the dairy lots out here. And so it's not the best compost. It's usually a little salty, usually a little alkaline, and it usually robs all the nitrogen from the soil mix. Where when we look at Malibu or the Oli or worm castings, they give to the soil, they don't take, and those are typically better. But without an analysis, it'd be really hard for me to say. Other than that, black gypsum, I would just want to know that that's of some sort of purity. Black gypsum, I don't know exactly what that is, but gypsum does mean calcium sulfate. So if that black gypsum, if you could see if it's heavy metal rich, that would be my only concern. Some sort of heavy metal report. then I would be comfortable using any real source of gypsum. And from my findings, gypsum has not been high in heavy metals. So it's not on the top of my concern list, but that would be something that I would absolutely consider. Now, assuming that the humus compost is a good compost and that the gypsum is like gypsum, those would be great local sources. Without spending money at the lab, one of the things you can do is mix a mixture of that compost and peat and aeration, and start with maybe 10% compost. Do a 15, do a 20, maybe do a 30. You could always do a 10, 20, 30. You could do a 10, 30. You want to mix a couple recipes at ratios and then just plant a pepper plant into it. Or better yet, plant a bean plant. They're very picky. And you're going to see which percentage does best and you can run with it. If none of them do well, then you know that compost isn't good. And even when you see a nutrient profile on compost, if you grow a bean in it and it can't grow, a lot of times that'll tell you there may be pesticide residue in it. So that's cheaper than a test, and I hope that helps you. Mike, what do you think about hops viroid and other virus-like mosaic? It seems like they even come from seed. Reusing soil is not a good idea as the viroid stays in the roots. Do you guys test your mom plants for them? Seems like a huge issue not many people are talking about. Well, one of the good things is that I'm only growing from seed, and most of my seed is from pre-hops viroid problem. Also, I tend not to freak out about most things. But when it comes to like these freakouts, I try and follow the same practices. I don't freak out, I do everything good, and I'm not gonna go buy a whole bunch of random new seed and pop it. And if I did see something that looks like hop latent, I would obviously have to start learning more about it and how to avoid it. But off the top of my head, typically, when it comes to not freaking out, what I mean is all this stuff's natural, and although some of it can be really terrible, a lot of times the natural organic methods will prevent a lot of this, where in hydro you can see it just decimate grows, where in living soil it might lower yield. So obviously we want to avoid that. But the mustard seed has been phenomenal. I've heard of people worrying about Pythium or Fusarium or other issues, and those are ubiquitous. Depending on where you live, it could be even worse. But the mustard seed meal has proven to be an excellent biofumigator to help remediate soil and fix it. That's why we include it in our mixing. So I would be curious to do some more research on the mustard seed and how it might affect the hops viroid in the soil. Otherwise, there's many other things that you can do to help remediate the soil, and it is a topic of concern. If I was a commercial grow and I had thousands of dollars of soil and I had hop latent viroid, believe me, I would be doing a lot more research than me just guessing on an FAQ video. So I do take this stuff serious. However, it has not really affected my world yet based on how I do things. Me reusing the soil, I'm not having any hops issues, HPLVD issues. I remember back in the day, we used to just say, like everybody would joke that everything they had was HPLVD. And now that it's real, obviously it's a thing. But back in the day, man, everything was like, oh, it's probably the hops viroid. So maybe that's why I don't treat it as serious. But I know it's a really big problem out there. I do notice that it seems to travel amongst people that are collecting the latest clones that you have to have. And so if that's you, then obviously learn how to do testing, learn more about HPLVD. I'm sure that we'll hear more stories about it showing up in seeds, but the living soil produced seeds, my buddies, the breeders that I work with, my old seed stash, luckily it hasn't had any effect on my world yet. So good question. That's a really good topic. Do you at least test your mom? Do you guys test your mom plants? No. My mom's are pretty recent. There's absolutely no issue with it. It's healthy. And so if I suspected that there was some sort of genetic decline and I thought maybe it was HPLVD, I'd just get rid of the mom. I don't think anything's that rare in my world. All the plants that I've grown, I like. And so for me to go through a few more packs and find another keeper wouldn't be a huge deal. Especially like, I love that Fruit by the Funk. Well, like Covert's got packs on packs on packs with those parents, like the ChemD I-95 and the halitosis back crosses. And so I'm positive I can find more fuel in there if I had to. That's just how I think about it. Okay, I gotta keep going. I'm gonna get stuck on these or I'll be here all day. Young Gold, my second run of no-till, but I got local worm castings and now have an explosion of fungus gnats right after I flipped to flower. How can I fight the gnats without fighting the natural biology in the soil? I already tried neem oil, peppermint oil, Kuyaha, and regimens separately, and I thought I was following a pretty good IPM from the start on day 5 of flower. Man, this sucks. At this point, I might just write it out. It is what it is. I've seen it completely dwindle before you get deep into flower, which is where the flyers can get stick in the bud. And worst case, you'll trim them off. They don't really get deep, but it can be a problem. And so if you got the ability to bottom water, you might start bottom watering now instead of top, and then just hit the top occasionally after you've gone on a good break. And you can almost 180 this within a week if you eliminate that moisture source up top. If you've got a pretty heavy mulch layer and it is really wet, you might want to take it a level 2, which would be to scrape that entire mulch layer, and it kind of sucks, but remove a lot of the larvae all in one go. then start that bottom watering and you should be good. Besides that, we're working on a couple of products. One is like a mosquito bit, BTI, but it is a much more potent dose made from the manufacturer who supplies most companies with BTI. And they're working on the approval for a fungus gnat application, which is a higher insecticidal unit of this natural biology. And so when we release that, I'll let you know. We'd like to incorporate it into our soil mixing line and have it available for when people buy composts and things like that for a flare-up. We also have another product that we're considering carrying, which is Canadian Exchange, I think, makes it. It's called Tea Drops. And I've heard some people remark about that, so that might be something to Google and look into. I know that it's temperature sensitive, but that's another living product that apparently works really well with fungus gnats. So those are things that I've learned. Honestly, the guaranteed way is to put a barrier, and if you're in 5 gallons, let's say, you could pour sand on top and they'd be gone. And then you could remove the sand after that, return to normal. But I had a little bit of a fungus gnat flare up in season 5 here, and I just, was bottom watering a little bit more on the container side, and it completely went away. And so I hope the same thing happens for you, as fungus gnats are a definite problem when it comes to living soil. But what I want to encourage you to do is not freak out so bad that you end up treating it so aggressively that it becomes worse than the actual problem, which is just a few fungus gnats. And I promise, if you break that moisture in the top layer, although we talk about having a moist top layer during times of fungus gnat infection, we want to avoid that until the cycle is broken. So bottom watering can help a lot with that if possible. Oh man, fungus gnats, that's a really good question. And I promise when we test out those products, we'll do another conversation about it. If I find anything that works like guaranteed, of course, we'll discuss that. Microbe feeder. You said something that I would love for you to explain. You said that in the room it will be in the 70s, but inside the tent it will be 65 degrees. How do you achieve that without an AC? Cheers. This one's pretty simple. I hate to spoil it for you, microbe feeder, but in the ambient environment when it's like 70 degrees and there's lights on, when you're in the tent and we're in Colorado and it's normally 30% humidity, as soon as I add a little bit of humidity to that tent and I move the air just a little bit, it drops it a few degrees. It may not be as much as 5 all the time, but it definitely lowers it. And it's just the effect that adding that humidity, just like a swamp cooler has. So normally a swamp cooler, if you're in a humid environment, it does nothing but swamp you out. But if it's bone dry, a swamp cooler works wonders on temperature difference. So my postulation is that in my tent that's 70 degrees, when I add the humidity, and now it's 60% humidity in the tent, and I'm moving a tiny bit of air out because the plants are freshly put in there, it lowers the temp a few degrees. Good question, I like it. Steve says, when you say you use filtered water, does that mean you already pH balanced it, or is pH not a living soil? Not a thing in living soil? If so, then that's a game changer. I will be starting with living soil today. No pHing in living soil. In fact, go to our Instagram, there's a conversation about it. These conversations get really heated. A lot of the companies that are discussing this stuff, they don't grow. And so they're regurgitating information. They have to look it up when they're discussing it. But when it comes to living soil growers in general, we don't pH. And there's a few reasons for that. If we get really into soil testing, water testing, commercial grow facilities and applications, of course, we're gonna pay attention to the water. But what I've found is that 90% of our customers that have clean water in an indoor grow, when we're discussing pH, we're having like very clean water that's very likely not to affect the soil very much, even if you adjust the pH. It's kind of weak, if that makes sense. Where with agricultural water, you might have a pH that's high, but it's similarly weak. It's just a little bit of calcium or something that's not that dramatic. Or you might have some agricultural water that's high in sodium or absolutely full of alkalinity and bicarbonates and other problems that would ruin your soil if you used it. So in those instances where the alkalinity is the problem, adding an acid to neutralize that makes a significant impact and would also be very important for living soil. But the average grower that can have filtered water, just a regular filter, not even RO, is more than enough. And that water is going to be more than likely fairly neutral. It has to make it through your tap water system. They don't want to ruin those pipes. Then you're going to filter it, and from that point, there's just no pHing required. The soil has your calcium, magnesium, potassium, sodium, all of those cations and anions, and they're in this matrix that basically makes up the soil pH. And then the biology right around the root of your plant can dramatically increase or decrease the pH up to 1 to 2 points on a logarithmic scale, which is huge. So for the most part, when you have a good balanced soil recipe, and you have good, clean water, zero reason. There's just no reason to pH whatsoever. When you have a commercial facility, maybe some sodium in the water, maybe fluctuating water, pH could be game-changing, or at least treating the water for what your problems are. So hopefully that helps it. A lot more to that conversation, but the gist of it is living soil, indoor grows. We don't do the whole pH thing. There's no reason to. Let's see, Dell Audio. How long did you veg the plants in season 5? I think it was 21 days. I have to go back and look, but usually I try and be like a 10-day veg with good stretchers and higher plant count. If I have to do less plant count, like I'm videoing it for YouTube, then I'll increase the veg time. And I probably could have done a little bit better, but man, different genetics make a big difference. Some, like the Fruit by the Funk that love to stretch, I can run a much shorter veg time, and I like that because flowering is the best time. I always want my lights to be running during flower, and I want minimal veg time because veg doesn't get you the same reward for running the electricity. So hopefully that answers your question. About 3 weeks for season 5. And then I mentioned it in a previous video, but I don't know how they'll drop. The Soleil Levant was over 2 pounds. And depending on how we calculate, like I don't have an exact number for the wattage I used because my LED was not at full power the whole time. I mean, it's gotta be 2 grams per watt or close. So really, really good yield on there. And that was with a 3-week veg. So Brea, I have been curing about a week now, and the buds have been getting pretty sticky and moist again. Will this mess up the final product? They have a little bounce, but stay kind of squished down. Is it fine as long as I'm opening the jar like twice daily? Little hay smell. I think I pulled the bud a bit too early from drying. Even pulled them out of the jars on a rolling trays, and seems like a bit too sticky and more hay aroma. When I put back in the jars, it smelled better. Let me know what you guys think. This is classic, Brea, and you're just learn from this experience. But typically less is more. And so it's possible if you preempted it into the jar and your gut is telling you it's a little too wet, then yes, burping it's good. Otherwise, what we want to do is avoid that happening by getting it to a stem snap or damn close before you put it in the jar. When you have experience where you know what is able to stay in a bag for a long time without spoiling at that peak moisture, you just know what that feels like, and you'll know if you're beyond that. But it should feel nice and moist, but the stem inside, the nug should still snap apart even though it's nice and moist. If it starts to kind of tear, you know it's still too wet. You want to leave the lid off for another day or two. Just let the jar with the lid off. But ideally, what I do is I do the 16 to 18 day dry. I really make sure that it's ready by the time I trim it to go into the jar, and then I seal it and I never open it. Maybe, if I was worried, I might open it once or twice to check, but I try not to open them twice daily and let all the terps out, if that makes sense. It's not like they're really just flying out, but to me, it's like I'm exchanging the air in there. And what I try and do is get the dry right. So basically the drying is the curing. When I put it in the jar, it seals up, that's it, and that's where I keep it. So for you, since you're newer and you're going through this right now, I would say just trust your gut, even though it may be slightly wrong, and err on the side of caution, where you do open it, burp it, and make sure that it's not too wet. After this experience, and after you've gone through another round, I think you'll know exactly where to put it in the jar, and you won't have to do that again. So thank you for sharing. Okay, we've got 5 more questions, and then I'll wrap up this episode. Jimmy says, how long have you been growing, mate? Good question. So I dabbled a little bit before I moved to Colorado, but it became a necessity because it wasn't as widely available, at least the quality that I was used to. First time I saw brick was moving to Colorado in 2009. California growing up, I was so lucky. Even like the swag was good. And for the most part, it was just chronic, or it was herb. It was nothing, like no names, nothing special, but it was always good. And when I moved out here, before I moved, I got my cannabis, my medical license in California. So I was able to dabble in all of the different herbs and flavors. And that got me thinking about growing more. I had a buddy that grew then, and I messed around and I tried to grow with him, but I didn't get my full setup until 2009 when I moved here to Colorado. And so that is about, 14 years now? So not as long as many people, but I have been 24/7, 365. That entire time I've had a grow going. I don't think there's been a moment where I've not had a grow going since I started. So good question. Thanks for asking, Jimmy. Deloy. Hey, I'm not an expert at all, but do you think by drying up in the bed like the autos did, they pulled up more terps from the root system and possibly added to the flavor? I honestly have no idea. That's a good thought, meaning it's almost like if there's water in there, it's diluting it. Like when you freeze dry fruit, the sugar content is so high compared to the moisture that tastes twice as sweet. It's very possible, but I just think that those autoflowers that Daz produces are super terpy, and I'm really happy with them. They're strong, they're terpy, you get lots of flavors out of them. I have my dislikes as far as I really latch on to certain ones and I want to clone and I want to grow it again. I don't really think it had to do with the dry down. I just think they are loud and they did a good job. I will say that crop steering is a thing and that people do look to have small amounts of dry down. And when you have a dry down, the amount of force the plant has to put on the soil to extract the moisture is significantly higher. And that small level of stress can increase the natural plant defense system, and flavor and terpenes and some of those are part of that defense system. So it does make some sense, but I wouldn't take it to the point of wilting. I think some people take the drybacks a little too far, okay? And by the way, I'm not an expert either. I'm just an enthusiast who likes to share his experience and who does multiple rounds per year, so I have lots of lessons that I learn every single year. William, how many white soil mites would be in an infestation? I noticed the top of the soil has white dots everywhere, it seems like. Top dressed it about a week ago. I wouldn't worry. These infestations, they go in booms and busts. And so you'll see one big population, they'll eat a bunch of stuff, they'll run out of food and they'll die. Some other food source will ramp up and eat them, and then it'll come to some sort of homeostasis and you'll be good to go. I've had them literally crawling all over everything. To me, too much is when you have very little airflow, very wet mulch layer leaning on all of the stalks of your plants. And if you see these little slow-moving orb mites, these white mites moving up into the plant, you've taken it too far. The plant is my territory, the soil is yours, and so you at least have to manage things so they stay within their zones. Otherwise, I don't worry about it too much when the soil mites go crazy. In the earth boxes, they go off. But if you just top dressed, they have lots of stuff to eat right now. So they're gonna be doing their thing until they run out, then they'll die, become part of the life cycle, and you should be totally fine. So observe. It's one of the parts of integrated pest management. Observe, take notice of the population, watch it for a little while, make sure it's not causing damage, and then it should correct itself. If it doesn't, and there is any issue, then you want to take further action. And if that does happen, we're here for you. You can reach out. At that point, I would recommend removing some mulch layer, increasing airflow under canopy, and you should completely eliminate the problem. However, most people don't have a problem. They're just part of the benefit of the living soil. All right, Kel, I have a 2-year-old mom plant in a 15-gallon pot. Recently, the soil bricked up and doesn't drain as easy anymore. What can I do to fix this? Thanks. You can grow some cover crop in it and feed it, and that will help break it down. You can add some worms to it. The other thing, 2 years in a 15-gallon, might be time to take that out of the 15-gallon and literally break up the root ball, remove some of that soil, and then take that same 15-gallon, put fresh soil in it, and you can either cut it with like a big knife, or you can just kind of break it up and take some of the soil off, and then put it in new soil. And it might sound a little stressful, but really you're just tending to your mom plant. And so if you look up bonsai mums, M-U-M-S, there's some great threads from like the overgrow days that discuss how to keep a bonsai mom. It's the same thing in a bigger container. It's just a little bit more of a pain with a 15-gallon, but you can renew it that way. Alternatively, what I do, totally up to you, get that mom raging with health, take fresh cuts, make sure they're rooted and ditch the mom, have a new mom, new soil container, problem is now bypassed. However, you can break up the root ball, put it in fresh soil, and keep that thing going forever. So, really good question. Okay, last one, Oda. Oda says, are you going to have a Black Friday sale on Black Friday? Yes, we're in the middle of our Black Friday sale right now as I record this. Dean sent me this FAQ last week, maybe even the week before, and I didn't do it because we've been busy getting ready for the Black Friday sale. And sometimes I just get overwhelmed. You know, I'm running a business with employees and life, and I'm not always able to follow through with my commitments to record. Although we do it pretty routinely. Sometimes I miss a week or I miss a day. Our Black Friday sale just started. It's going until the 27th. So that means that it'll be there for Black Friday. It'll end on Cyber Monday. So please take advantage of it. We've got a whole bunch of cool things going, and we're gonna have a contest that I'll be announcing as well. If you're watching this video and the contest hasn't been announced yet, we'll be dropping a YouTube short when that contest starts. There's gonna be lots of ways to enter the contest, as we're gonna have a huge giveaway. So thank you everyone for posting up these questions. Thanks for watching our YouTube series. I think that's gonna be the last FAQ for season 5, but we have 2-3 more weeks while we've got to prepare, plan, finish the sale, get ready for season 6. So it's possible we'll have one more. We'll see. If you've got questions, post them up in here. If there's enough good ones, we'll create one more FAQ for the season. Otherwise, as always, subscribe, like, tell your friends about this stuff. The YouTube algorithm, it always age restricts us. And so if you're not subscribed, you may not know about the videos, and then it's harder to remember to watch. So we love it when you subscribe, like, tell your friends, and until next time, I'll see you on the next BuildASoil FAQ video.